All right, it is 12 o'clock. We are going to go ahead and get started. A little housekeeping before I kick it off to Tobias. If you would make sure that your camera is off and that your microphone is muted, just to make sure that the presenter is not interrupted during the presentation, that would be great. Please feel free to ask questions throughout Tobias's presentation. Either unmute yourself, raise your hand, or feel free to throw the question in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat throughout the presentation, so feel free to make this more interactive, and that way Tobias can answer any questions you might have. So with that, welcome to part 4 of the Tax Increment Financing Workshop Series hosted by Southeast Nebraska Development District. My name is Kelly Gentrup. I'm the Director of Development Services here at SEND, and I'm very excited to introduce our speaker today, who's going to be talking about community and economic development, the perspective from TIF. So with that, I am going to kick it over to Tobias Templemeyer, who is the City Administrator for the City of Beatrice. Tobias, it's all on you.
All right, thank you very much, Kelly. So if any of you are sitting here listening to part 4 of a presentation on TIF, either you are very bored or very excited about TIF. We'll hope it's the latter one as we kind of go through some slides here that I prepared, and happy to answer any questions you might have. Kelly, are you controlling the slides for me?
Yes, I will.
Perfect. If you can go to the first one. So the next slide up here is, you got it there, Kelly?
Is it the TIF areas?
Yes.
Okay. Want me to go to the next one?
Yes, please.
Okay. Let me know if I need to go back.
Well, the only thing I see still is the opening slide. I don't see the map itself.
Okay.
Let me need to go to enable editing. You're in a protected view at the top of the screen.
Let's try this again. Oh, maybe. All right. Hold on. Can you see it now, or are you seeing something different?
Very good.
Okay.
So this is all the redevelopment areas that we have here in the city of Beatrice. We have designated 10 different areas as redevelopment areas in our community. We started with the first one back in 1997. The most recent one we added, we did just this last year. You can see they're kind of oddly shaped, and we'll go over some of those here in a minute. First class cities can have 35% of their community designated as blight and substandard. City of Beatrice, we are at 34.02%. So we have to get creative at times on getting areas in or out based upon what is needed. Go to the next slide there. So I kind of zoomed in on a couple of areas here. So area number 1's our industrial park. You see in the bottom left-hand corner there, we excluded that area. We excluded that area because it is all in the floodplain. It's all part of basically one guy's backyard. It's not going to be open for development anytime soon. And so since we're close on those percentages, we look for areas like that we can cut out, that we know are not going to be developed, rather than having taking up portions of our redevelopment area that we need. The star there, that was the airport. Originally, when we did area number 1, Back in 1997, the city included the airport. I don't know why. Airports don't pay property taxes, so they really can't use TIF. So again, we just cut that area out to save quite a bit of space. The arrow on the right there is a cemetery. Same thing. Area number 5. So we had a business on the very north end of the community that was looking to come into the city of Beatrice. In order to make TIF available to them, I had to find a way to get a redevelopment area up there. It's a brand new hospital that's located out there. It's a bunch of row crop. So trying to find a way to get that area designated was going to be difficult. So you can see we kind of wrapped area 5 back down around the east side of town, and ultimately on the very southern end there got into some residential neighborhoods so we can meet the qualifications of the blight and substandard requirements to make TIF available up on the north end of there. On the next slide, we have a couple more areas that we've done, starting with area number 6 there on the bottom in the blue. The arrow is pointing to an area there where we wanted to build some residential housing. That area is generally a retirement community. Most houses out there are duplexes or triplexes. They all sell for north of $200,000 for each unit. They wanted to extend that development. In order to make TIF available to them, we had to kind of, again, shade the area there to the left and then come back up north and into some lower income housing in that area there to try to get that area designated as blight and substandard. Obviously, we were able to do that and then use that designation to help the development there with the retirement community. Area number 7 is something similar there in the green. We're trying to reach all the different areas. We had to extend to the arrow on the left there. That's just a residential neighborhood. It's a good neighborhood. It's got houses that are probably today selling for $200,000. But every house in that neighborhood was 40 years old. If you look at your redevelopment area, if it's 40 years old, right, that starts to qualify for the blight substandard. So including that residential neighborhood allowed me to get the rest of area number 7 to be designated as blight and substandard, so we could use TIF in other redevelopment areas there. And the area at the top, again, we excluded that area because it is a church. Churches don't pay property taxes. And since we're right up against the cap on the amount of land space that I can have, we excluded that one when we went forward there. Go to the next slide. Looking at challenges, really the biggest challenge that we've had is just the term blight and substandard. It's a horrible term, but that's the one we're forced to use. Every time we talk about TIF, we're very careful at council meetings to make sure we let people know that it's not our term. It doesn't mean anything as far as their particular properties go. I've only had one citizen complain about TIF here in town. That was because her house was designated as blight and substandard. She figured it out a year later after it was done. She demanded that the city take her house out of the blight and substandard area. We did not do that. But that's really the only challenge that we've had with regards to TIF here in Beatrice. And I know that's not probably the story all of you have had out there, but luckily that's where we've been so far. On the next slide, we talk about, why do we use TIF here in Beatrice? We start looking at economic development tools that are available. There's not a lot that are out there. We have LB 840, and yes, we have $500,000 in funds there that we can use for various projects. But you start talking some of these projects, that's just not a lot of money. We have some utility funds that we can help with, maybe an electrical build out or some of those things. But again, it's just hard to use electric funds to build a street. Those become difficult to do. And so you start looking at it, there's just not a lot of tools out there. And so that's why we rely heavily on TIF to help make projects viable and get those developments here into our community. If we go to the next slide, looking at just kind of TIF history here in Beatrice. Again, the first area was in 1997. We didn't do a lot in that first decade. You can see we didn't do a lot in the early portion of 2000s, 2010s, one project here and there. They're 4 years apart. But since 2016, we've become really active in TIF, started TIFing a lot more projects. Part of that was a new mayor coming into the community, really focus on economic development and how it is we could help those prospects either come into the community or help current ones build. Part of it also was the city becoming more familiar with TIF and how it works. We do all of the TIF work in-house, so we do not hire anything out. And so a lot of it was just us learning ourselves what's allowed, what's not allowed, how do we use it, those types of things. On the next slide, again, kind of just looking at our TIF history here, we've only had one TIF project we've ever denied. That one was for the construction of a building, despite the fact that they were told not to build the building until after the TIF was in place. When it came time to approve the redevelopment agreement, the developer already had the foundation poured and the walls up. Made it very hard to argue the but-for test, and so we denied that TIF application. We've had two that we made restart the TIF process. They went through it once, got to the point where they did not sign the redevelopment agreement. It kind of lingered for a couple of years before they were really ready to get started again. We made them just start the process over just to make sure that everybody was on board, everybody understood what the project was, understood how this thing was going to work. And then right now we have 5 different TIF projects that the city has approved them, and we're waiting for the developer to sign the redevelopment agreements. Some of that is due to the fact that we have figured out how to get a TIF project done in 45 days. And so oftentimes everybody wants to blame the government for moving slow. We've figured out a way to kind of get those projects moving. And sometimes we now move faster than developers or banks are ready to move. And so again, we have about 5 of them kind of sitting there waiting in a holding pattern to just finalize the last signature, if you will, on those projects. The next slide I have there just kind of talks about different projects we've done here. We've done some as little as $36,000 projects, about 1.6, I think is about the largest project we've done. We've done a little of everything. We've done commercial, we've done industrial, we've done housing. Since 2012, it's pretty evenly split. It's been 6 commercial, 5 industrial, 7 for residential use. Some of those numbers get a little difficult to look at because you might have had a commercial building that also had a residential unit on top. I just count it as commercial, but you can see it's been fairly evenly split. On the housing side of things, I mean, we've done one house. We had one person who built a house on their lot and we TIF'd it. We've done big developments, and then we've done something as large as a 72 unit apartment complex. So again, we've kind of done a little bit of everything out there. On the next slide, just example of some of the projects that we currently have in TIF working here. So the first one here is 323 Court Street. It's in the downtown, the heart of our downtown. This building was condemned by the city for 3 years. There's a very long story there of what took us 3 years, but ultimately we were able to acquire this property and get it transferred to somebody who's willing to save it. And so you can imagine the amount of dollars that they have to spend to try to save this building. The picture on the right, that is a big giant hole in their back wall that just continues to grow over time. So in order to help make such a project viable, we have to use a lot of different resources we have, and one of those is TIF. And so we were, again, it's in the downtown, it's a blighted area, but being able to use TIF allowed us to save this building rather than tear it down and have another empty lot in our downtown. It allowed the city to save. We ended up spending probably about $50,000 getting the land transferred and everything to the new owner. If we tore it down, we figured we were going to spend $250,000. So the city figures we've saved, a couple $100,000 by getting this building saved rather than demolition. And part of that was by using TIF. The next project I have for you is another one in our downtown. This is about a half a block away from the intersection of Highway 77 and 136. So again, right in the heart of our downtown. This building has sat there for quite a while and has not been used. A couple of attorneys have stepped forward and they want to refurbish this building and make it their law office again. And it'll look beautiful when they're done. It's taken a while because they're working through some historic tax credits and downtown revitalization grants, and they're working through CBG revolving loan funds, but they're also taking advantage of TIF. Again, it's something else we can do to help them make such a building viable. It ultimately doesn't have to be torn down. I think the developers in this one will probably put $1 million into this building. So if we can help them with TIF, why wouldn't we do that to make that building suitable again for another business? The next one I have here is a before picture. So this is, again, along Highway 136 in our community. This is what that building looked like in about 2007, probably as late as 2012. It's an unsightly building. At this point, it had not yet been condemned by the city, but it certainly was on the short list. It was used to store stuff, to be nice. Really no economic purpose to this building. Really was just a liability waiting to be had. If we go to the next slide, you can see the after picture. Using TIF, we had a developer come in, local guy, bought the building, has put a brewery in this building, has a speakeasy downstairs. It's got a clothing shop in it. There was a cigar shop. I'm not sure if that's still open or not. They're working now on refurbishing the second floor to make additional businesses up there. The biggest issue we have with this building now is finding ample parking, which is a great problem to have, right? We have a number of people who are attracted to this business and this building that we're trying to find other places for them to park. So in 2017, this building was assessed at just under $23,000. Today, that building is assessed at over $637,000. So a significant improvement. And that does not talk about the other economic development impacts that it's had, from bringing people to our community, to the sales tax dollars, to the employees. I mean, all those other things that kind of continue to trickle down throughout our city. The other thing on this particular project was this was the first time the city TIF'd any interior improvements. Before this, we had been very conservative. We had TIF'd exterior things, dirt work, and site acquisition, those types of things. This is the first time we TIF'd anything inside. We TIF'd the elevator for this building. Again, looking at that first list, we talked about how the city's kind of learned over time. This was one of those examples where the city we talked to towns like Hastings who had done this before, and how do you do it, and looking through the statutes, making sure we were comfortable with things. But again, just a huge improvement to our community and to our downtown. And without TIF, these types of projects would not be possible.
Tobias, was there anything, any improvements within this project that were not eligible through TIF?
Oh, sure. There would have been things that they did that were not eligible through it. There were probably lots of things that were eligible that we did not include. Again, just because we were trying to get comfortable on what we could do, what we couldn't do. But the elevator was one that we thought very easily fit life safety, code requirement, those types of things could easily fit within the statute. And so that's kind of why it was our first dip, if you will, into that side of the waters.
Sure.
The next example I have for you is one of our residential properties. And I'm sure many of you have lots that look like this, right? It's just some lots. It's got 2 gravel streets next to it. There's really nothing here that would attract you. If you go to the next slide, with the use of TIF, we ended up with 6 houses on those lots. We refer to these as our tiny homes. Each one of those houses is right at 1,000 square feet. It helps us meet a different demographic, meet some different needs that people have in our community for housing. The developer who built these has had every one of these rented from the day he's built them and has had no problems renting them out. Not everybody wants half an acre and a white picket fence. So it's been a good development there. So those lots, each lot in 2017 was assessed at $1,700. Today, each one of those lots is assessed at $98,000. So a significant improvement on what was there previously. And this particular project, we use the TIF revenue that's generated to pave the street out in front. That's what the developer wanted to do. He wanted to make sure it was on a hard surface street in front of these houses. And so that's what we use those TIF dollars for. But again, a significant improvement. And again, just trying to find some other housing options for our community.
Tobias, a lot of communities typically get pushback from taxing entities, for example, the school. Have you run into any issues with this?
We have not. Our school district has been very supportive of all of our projects. You see, about a third of them have been residential properties. They understand that these additional housing units out there will allow them to attract kids to our community, which go to their school district, and then it helps them with TIOSA formulas and everything else. They understand that they want to attract teachers to the community. We got to have houses. And so, again, having different housing options helps them in that endeavor. They understand the benefit that they may not get anything today, but by having some additional housing and bringing in factory workers or engineers or whatever they might be, ultimately this kind of helps the entire community grow. And so we have not had pushback from our school district on our TIF projects. The next project I have for you is another housing project that we had here in the community. So the picture on the left is the old hospital. We built a new hospital just north of the community here. And the old hospital took up a city block. They had some other land around that. And so you start wondering, what are you going to do? What can you do with an old hospital? How do you reuse this? And we were able to work a partnership out with Excel Development to come in to the hospital, and a couple other partners in there, that we use TIF as one of the incentives. We were able to demolish that and build back a number of residential units. In the end, we ended up with 6 single-family houses. We ended up with 8 duplexes that are for senior living. We have 4 lots that are still available. We have another TIF project coming through that should take 2 of those lots. Again, assessed value in the hospital there was $0, right? They don't pay property taxes. Today, it's north of $2 million. So a big improvement in that area. And again, we just had to work to fit it in. That old hospital was in the middle of a residential neighborhood. And so we looked to find a partner that would help us kind of mirror that area and fit everything in. And I think they've done a great job there. So this one is Storecraft. I'm sure many of you have these old legacy industrial sites in your community. As you can tell from this picture, Storecraft's been around forever here in town. I think it operated for 100 years. Eventually it fell into bankruptcy, and you're looking at a site that covered about 15 acres, wondering what you're going to do with it. And if you look at the building there on the left, that building there, if you go to the next slide, that building is now the home to this apartment unit, which just opened here in the community. Again, such a development would not be possible without TIF in our community. This is now the largest apartment complex in the city of Beatrice. We had not built anything close to this in probably 30 or 40 years. Again, just trying to find other housing options and make them available to our citizens. There are lots of people who want just an apartment and have everything kind of taken care of for them and don't have to worry about a yard and whatever else. And so these are things, here's market rate. So we don't have some of those other concerns that sometimes you hear. So again, been a great addition to our community, and we're excited to see what happens on the north side and the rest of the Storecraft property. But been a good, yeah.
when you redeveloped this area from the industrial to commercial with the multi-unit apartment complex, were there any sort of environmental concerns that you had to maybe pay, utilizing TIF to pay for those studies? Or was it pretty easy to revitalize that area?
There certainly were some environmental concerns. I mean, again, a good old industrial site, been around for 100 years, there's going to be something.
Mm-hmm.
And very luckily, with our great partners at NDEE, they helped us kind of navigate through some of those. We got some Section 128A grants to help do some evaluations and some assessments on those particular sites, figure out what can work, where can you put residents, where it has to be commercial and development. So we were able to work with those partners to get this thing kind of put together. But no, we did not use TIF on any of the environmental stuff, no.
Okay, thank you.
And then the last example I have for you here is Hannibal View. Hannibal View is a great little subdivision here in the community. It was built late 1990s. The first building, I think it went up in about 2000. You can see there's a couple apartment buildings out there and then some duplexes. But for whatever reason, buildings stopped out there in 2008. I don't know why. I'm sure there's a long history there, but it just stopped. And so it kind of sat just the way you see it there for a decade before we had an opportunity to sit down with the developer and bring TIF to the table there. So the developer in this case had already poured all the streets, had already put all the infrastructure in, had outlaid quite a bit of money. And so as you can imagine, for him then to sit on it for a decade was not an easy endeavor. But so in 2018, we TIF'd the last 33 lots that they had. And go to the next slide. Since then, we've done it in 4 phases. We've got 16 houses out there. Some of them are done and complete, as you see, ready to move in, and some are in stages where the basements are being dug and foundations put up. When we first started this, we based our TIF on these houses selling for about $131,000. They're now selling for $250,000. So the TIF is going to pay off a lot earlier than anticipated. But it's been a great project, and for whatever reason, just being able to use TIF kind of helped get that thing spearhead again and moving forward. But again, a great residential neighborhood to our community, right next to a beautiful park that we have here. So the next slide I have here is just some of the lessons that we have kind of learned as we've gone through things here. One is being able to de-TIF areas. Things change over time. You have to be willing to come in and take areas out that you once had designated blight and substandard. Obviously, the city here, we're kind of required to do it just because we're up against that limit so much. But it's just really being willing to sit back, look at what areas you have, what makes sense, how things kind of growing, and don't be just tied to where the map was at years ago. The next one is the but-for. I'm sure somebody else has covered the but-for and what that's required out there. We just always have a developer provide us a letter that says, but-for TIF, I wouldn't do this project. That way we've got it, and maybe comes back and ask. We've got that kind of stuff in our file, but certainly would encourage you to have those things. The next bullet point there, collect additional TIF revenue. It's something we learned about a decade ago. We saw that Lincoln had done this. And so we kind of did some looking into it, and we now include this paragraph in all of our TIF agreements. And it basically says if there's any residual TIF revenues during the 15 years that exceed the TIF payoff indebtedness, the CRA will keep those TIF revenues and use it for improvements in that area. So as an example, we have not had any projects get paid off yet, so where we could collect the additional TIF revenue. But the one that is going there quickly is the Hannibal View project that we talked about. There are 2 streets that lead into Hannibal View. One of them is a gravel road today. The plan has been is once the TIF revenue has exceeded the TIF indebtedness. We use the additional funds to go back in and pave that gravel road into that neighborhood. It's probably about a 2-block stretch. We just don't have it in the funding today to ever get that road paved. And quite honestly, when there weren't houses out there, there wasn't a big push to get it paved, but as it builds out, it grows upon itself. But this is something we've started to add to all of our redevelopment agreements as we move forward. We do charge for an application fee. We're not looking to make money on our TIF projects. I think our application fee is $250. And the reason being is there are 5 public meetings. By the time I publish notice in the paper 5 times, it becomes a significant cost. In addition, you have to mail out certified mailings for 2 of those hearings. When we mail those out, we have to mail them to 10 separate places for each time. So we just figured the cost of those expenses, and that's what we pass on to the developer. We do not charge for my time on drafting all the TIF documents. We don't charge for the attorney's time drafting TIF documents, none of those things. Just simply looking to reimburse our expenses. It also kind of helps keep some TIF projects from even applying. As I showed you, we had 5 of them that are kind of waiting for the redeveloper to sign the agreement, because you had a redeveloper that maybe had an idea Saturday night, applies on Monday. So we start working on things, and then by Tuesday, he's already found something else he wants to do. And so rather than spending our time and on projects that we just are not going to go anywhere, it kind of helps keep some of those out. TIF phases, something we've learned how to use here, but essentially what the phasing allows you to do is make sure that each lot gets their 15 years of redevelopment time. So Hannibal View, you take that one with 33 lots, there's no way the city's going to build those out in 1 year. We're not growing that fast. And so if I just done TIF over all of it at one time, if it took them a decade to get through all those lots, the last house built would have only had 5 years of TIF revenue coming in. And if you can give that last lot all 15 years rather than just 5, you can really change the economics on a project and make it so maybe that project now becomes viable, whereas before it wasn't. Fairly simple. We just signed one redevelopment agreement, and then as every year we meet with the developer and say, okay, what lots got done, which ones didn't, and we amend the agreement, designate what a certain phase is, follow the paperwork to divide taxes, and then meet again next year to see what's the next phase. So again, just really kind of helps maximize the TIF revenue that's available. We have not done bucket TIF, and we have not done TIF layering yet. I'm excited to do a TIF layering project at some point here. We just have not had the right project come up yet to use that, but I think we will here soon. The next thing is just be creative. You can still work within the letter of the law and do all those things, but sometimes you just have to get creative on how to get maybe a certain area so you can have TIF available there. Sometimes you have to get creative on how to get TIF eligible expenses there. As an example, one TIF eligible expense is site acquisition. Well, you can have company A sell to company B and simply TIF that sale. That's allowed to do it. So take the Storecraft site, one company bought it, tore the building down. He then sold it to another one of his companies. And then you're able to, and then the price goes up, obviously, because the land's improved, and you're able to TIF that sale of that property. So sometimes it's just kind of thinking through some of those things on how you can get additional TIF on the table there. And then I said, the last ones include the school. We've been very fortunate. We've had a member of the school on our CRA for 20 plus years. And so the school's been heavily involved with our TIF. They understand it. They understand what's going on. They get a chance to listen to the project, 3-4 times before it finally goes to a vote. And so we're able to, answer any questions or concerns they might have. But that's been a big blessing for us, is have them involved very early in the process. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions anybody might have. about TIF and how we do it down here. I'm not saying we're right or wrong, but it's just the way we do it here.
Tobias, for clarification, villages do not follow the first and second class city guidelines regarding percentages. Do you know the answer to that question?
I believe that's correct. I believe that they are allowed to TIF 100% of their community if they desire.
I would agree with that. Are there any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask. We're a little earlier.
And if anybody doesn't feel comfortable asking a question now, feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email anytime. I'll answer questions for you and walk through how we do things here. So,
hey Tobias, this is Tom. Was curious, you've been doing this a bit. What are some of the lessons you've learned, some of the pitfalls you've encountered, and what recommendations would you have for communities that are just kind of wading into these waters?
yeah, the one that you always hear out there is that, and I'll just pick on the school because they're the largest property tax assessor that's out there, that they are losing revenue, right? And I always argue that the school is not losing revenue. On those residential lots that were sitting over there that weren't built out, the school wasn't getting any tax revenue off of when they were $1,700. So today, when they're $98,000, the school is still getting the same amount of money that they were getting when they were $1,700 lots. Yes, the school has to wait their 15 years and then they'll get a big bump up. But that's one I hear out there often, is that, you know, that's causing the property taxes for the farmer and everybody else to go up higher. It's just, that's not the way it works. Once you work through the numbers, both through what the school gets from property taxes here, what they get through TIOSA formula, they are not negatively impacted. And then once you start to do enough of these projects, and you saw the city really get active there in 2016, you give us another 10 years and projects start rolling off, you can see the amount of money that we'll throw back onto our property valuation very quickly as we continue to roll forward. The other thing that people tend to forget about are personal property taxes. So while we may TIF a project coming in and the school may not get the property taxes on it, the real property taxes, they do get taxes on the personal property, which gets depreciated out quicker. I get it, but that money they do get right away and is a boost to the school and the county and everybody else very quickly.
Tobias, the Hannibal project that you had, you might have mentioned this, so I apologize if I'm asking a question you already answered, but what did those houses sell for?
So again, we thought they were going to go for 130. I think the first couple did, but with the run up in the market that's occurred over the last couple of years and the housing shortage that we face, just like every other community out there in Nebraska, they're selling for $250,000 now, and so a significant increase. And most of them don't have finished basements. So, you know, they're getting top dollar around here for development. So good for them.
Who was the developer for that project?
So the developer was a local gentleman here in town. He was tied into a industrial company here. So they kind of had the idea to start with, and then they've brought in Dan Kuber to be the builder on most of those houses here now. And actually, we use one of the rural workforce housing fund for one of those houses out there. So again, just finding other ways to kind of help make projects move forward. And that rural workforce housing loan that we started with kind of got the first one going. And since there, you can see it just has kind of snowballed from there.
Sure. Another question for you. We have been told towns, cities have used TIF for paving projects this is still a little confusing. Has Beatrice done this? Or do you have any experience or guidance on the how?
On using TIF to pave a street?
I believe so. Sharon, if you want to unmute yourself, if you want to maybe provide a little bit more context on your question.
Thank you. We've been told that certain townships have been able to use TIF funding for paving projects or expansion. And to myself and a few other members in our community, it's just very vague, and we don't know how to connect the dots on that process or if it's even allowable.
So you mentioned the townships in there. Are you thinking county townships?
Well, we're a village,
You're a
so
village.
yeah.
So yes, the city of Beatrice has used TIF to pave streets. Most recently, I had an industrial customer come in. They went in the far north end of our industrial park, and they paid to pave $600,000 worth of a street out to their facility. It's a TIF eligible expense. Really not much is ever questioned if somebody wants to pay for a street to go in out there. That's been pretty easy to do.
But that's on more of the developer and not us as a municipality.
So
going.
So in that
Correct.
case, the city hired the engineering firm. The redeveloper paid us back through TIF funds. The city then kind of oversaw the entire construction of it, but the redeveloper paid for it. And when it's all said and done, the city owns the street. So yes, we have paved city streets with TIF dollars for a number of projects.
That helps tremendously. Thank you.
And yeah, so if you want to talk about a particular thing, let me know. We'll happy to kind of walk through how we did it, but that's how we've done it before. And that was our most recent one, and that was probably about 3 years ago. But we've TIF'd and had used TIF revenues to pay for lots of infrastructure things: water lines, sewer lines, electrical, gas lines, streets are very easy. And then stormwater is one that a lot of people don't think about, but you can do there. You know, those are all easy infrastructure things that can be used for TIF.
Are there any other questions for Tobias?
Hey, Tobias, this might be a silly question, but if a community has an internet service provider that wants to work with them, wants to expand their infrastructure, can you TIF that?
It's a good question. I've not looked at internet before, of whether or not that would be eligible under the statute or not. I'm not sure, because the hard part there is going to be that you're not going to generate a lot of property or tax revenue. But if you had a new economic development prospect coming in and they needed the fiber line to run out to it, I think you might be able to make the argument that that should be eligible. Now, a lot of times those fiber companies will pay for that because they want the ongoing monthly revenue from the user. But I certainly think under the right circumstance that you probably could get it done.
All right, hearing silence from the group. Tobias, I want to thank you for providing your insight, the experience on, what Beatrice does in terms of TIF. And I will absolutely be sharing Tobias's slides, the recording of this presentation, in addition to the others. And then also there'll be a brief survey. We just kind of want to know if you have been with us through all 4 workshops, or if you decided to attend, 1 or 2 or 3. We just want to know your thoughts on the workshops, if you learned something, and then also feedback on what you would like to see from SEND moving forward. So with that, thank you again, Tobias, for your presentation. Thank you all for attending our workshop series, and we will see you again soon.